The news of this air disaster in Iran is slowly starting to trickle out. It's starting to get more traction now that the direct tensions between Washington and Tehran are sort of on hold after Iran's volley of missile fire at the Iraqi base last night. But that hasn't seemed to escalate since then. Hasn't de-escalated, but hasn't escalated either, which is good. But this disaster, very big disaster, starting to get traction now. So it's worth talking a little bit about this, and I think there's a number of questions that need to be asked. So this was a Boeing 737 Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 en route from Tehran to Kiev, and it crashed shortly after takeoff from Tehran, which is very often the case with aviation disasters. Um, it's very rare that you have a mid journey disaster. It's almost always either on landing or takeoff. And all 176 passengers and crew on board have died. So it's the deadliest accident in Iran in more than a decade. By far the deadliest accident of this decade so far. Earlier in the week, in a bad week for aviation, there was two military plane crashes, one in Sudan and one in Taiwan. But this is by far the biggest for some time. It's also the deadliest incident involving a 737 model, as I understand it, since a Mangalore plane crash that was Air India Express Flight 812 in 2010. Um, and the second deadliest involving the Boeing 737 series, regardless of variant, after the Lion Air Flight 610, which crashed in 2018 in Indonesia. Boeing, of course, has come under a lot of pressure with the Indonesian and more recently Ethiopian plane disasters. There are inevitably going to be questions around this one. Initial assessment suggests that it may have been an accident. Western sources, a Canadian source, suggests that the plane suffered a technical malfunction with some evidence that an engine had overheated. Now, there was amateur footage from a student in Tehran showing the plane coming down and then hitting the ground. What is going to raise a lot of questions is that this happened the very same night that the Iranian response to the killing of Soleimani occurred. So, the very same night that Iranian rockets were firing into the Iraqi bases. It just seems a bit of a coincidence. But of course, the only thing that matters is the facts of the case. Iran is a country that's had a lot of aviation disasters, but this particular model is supposed to have a good safety record overall. The Ukraine aviation authorities say that the model had been tested; it was in top condition. Most of the victims are supposed to be Iranians, but there's a lot of Canadian nationals on board as well. I imagine the report on Al Jazeera said they were students coming home, so I assume that's Canadian Iranian citizens. 11 Ukrainians who were predominantly crew members. There were harrowing scenes at Kiev airport. Um, and I understand one Swede was on board as well. So this is going to raise a lot of questions because of the time that this happened, and there will be echoes of was this, like MH17. I think it's too early to say that. It may well be that this was a tragic accident that occurred. Just it really was an unfortunate coincidence, but um, the tensions in the background don't help because apparently the Iranians aren't going to hand over the black box to Boeing. Boeing, of course, is based in Washington State, so that isn't helpful. It's not helpful for the victims, and it will only spur conspiracy theories. So I don't think the Iranians are being helpful in that regard. I mean, Boeing isn't the American government. Boeing's separate from that, so I think it would be a de-escalation move by Iran to do that for humanitarian reasons. Not to prolong suffering of the victims, the relatives, by prolonging the investigation. Although, like I say, apparently most of the victims on this flight were Iranians. So there's going to be a lot of questions asked. But anyway, only the first week of the year, and already we see a major aviation incident. I'm going to call it an incident, not an accident, not an attack, an incident, because we just don't know yet. Um, so let's see how this one develops. Let's see if it gets more traction or if it's overshadowed by other events.